At my sister's funeral, my husband held me and whispered, "She was the love of my life. Even gave me a son, something you never could." I stood there frozen. He had no idea I'd read their messages months ago. I just smiled, walked away, and started planning. I buried my sister that day. His turn would come soon enough. I felt his lips brush against my ear as we stood beside Mia's grave. Everyone around us was crying, but Patrick wasn't. His voice was calm, almost satisfied. "She was the love of my life. Even gave me a son, something you never could." My breath stopped. The funeral service continued around us, but I couldn't hear anything except those words echoing in my head. Patrick's arm tightened around my waist, and to everyone watching, we looked like a grieving couple supporting each other through loss. But I knew better now. I stared down at the wooden casket holding my sister's body. Mia was gone. She'd fought cancer for 8 months, and I'd been there through every treatment, every sleepless night, every moment of pain. I'd held her hand when the doctors delivered bad news. I'd watched her waste away until she was barely recognizable. And apparently I'd watched my husband fall in love with her. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of strength and truth. If you believe that women deserve justice and the courage to reclaim their power, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. Little Gabriel was crying somewhere behind us. 18 months old, and he'd never see his mother again. Daniel bounced him gently, trying to calm him down. Poor Daniel. He thought he was Gabriel's father. He'd been taking care of Mia during her illness, helping with the baby, acting like a devoted partner. He had no idea he was raising another man's child. My husband's child. "I know this is hard," Patrick whispered, his performance perfect for anyone listening. "But I'm here for you." The irony made my stomach turn. He was here for me. After confessing he loved my dead sister. After admitting he'd fathered her child while I spent 5 years begging God for a baby of my own. I remembered the phone calls now. Late-night conversations Patrick claimed were about work. The way he'd started volunteering to run errands for Mia when she got pregnant. How he knew exactly which brand of diapers Gabriel preferred, which songs made him sleep. I thought he was being helpful. A good brother-in-law. "Casey." Patrick's voice pulled me back to the cemetery. "You're shaking." I was. My whole body was trembling, but not from grief anymore. Something else was building inside me. Something cold and calculating that I didn't recognize. "I'm fine," I managed to say. But I wasn't fine. I was remembering things. Like the text message I'd seen on Patrick's phone 3 months ago. Mia's name on the screen with words that made my heart race. "I can't wait to see you tonight." When I'd asked Patrick about it, he'd laughed. "She's lonely, Casey. Scared about being a single mom. I'm just being supportive." I'd believed him. I'd actually felt guilty for questioning it. Now I wondered how many other lies I'd swallowed without question. The pastor finished speaking. People started moving toward their cars, but I couldn't make my feet work. Gabriel's crying had stopped. When I turned around, I saw him nestled against Daniel's chest, sucking his thumb. Daniel's eyes were red with tears. He loved that baby. Really loved him. "We should go," Patrick said. "People will be coming to the house." The house. Mia's house, where she'd spent her final months. Where I'd cooked her meals and helped her bathe and read stories to Gabriel while she rested. Where Patrick had apparently been playing house with my sister while I worked late shifts at the hospital. "Yes," I said quietly. "Let's go." As we walked to the car, I caught Daniel's eye. He looked lost, like a man who'd just buried his whole world. I wanted to warn him somehow. Tell him that everything he thought he knew was wrong. But what could I say? That my husband was probably Gabriel's real father? That my sister had been living a lie? "Take care of Gabriel," I said instead, touching Daniel's arm gently. He nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. "Always." The drive home was torture. Patrick talked about the service, about how beautiful Mia had looked, about how many people had come to pay their respects. His voice was steady, normal. Like he hadn't just confessed to having an affair with my dying sister. I made appropriate sounds of agreement while my mind raced. When had it started? How long had they been together? Did Mia love him back, or was she just lonely and scared like Patrick claimed? The worst part was not knowing if my sister had been a victim or a willing participant in destroying my marriage. We pulled into our driveway and I stared at the house we'd bought together. The house where we'd planned to raise our own children someday. The house where I'd cried over negative pregnancy tests while Patrick held me and promised everything would be okay. Had he been thinking of Mia during those moments? Comparing my broken body to her fertile one? Ready to face everyone? Patrick asked, turning off the engine. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I'd married 7 years ago. The man I'd trusted with my heart, my future, my dreams of motherhood. The man who'd just admitted to fathering a child with my sister while I remained heartbroken and empty. He had no idea that I'd seen those text messages months ago. No idea that I'd been suspicious but too afraid to dig deeper. No idea that his whispered confession had just confirmed my worst fears and lit something dark inside me. Ready, I said and smiled. As I was ready. Not for the reception or the casseroles or the well-meaning condolences from family friends. I was ready for something else entirely. Patrick thought his secret was safe. He thought he could whisper his truth at my sister's grave and I'd be too shocked, too grief-stricken to process it. He was wrong. As we walked toward the house, I began planning. Not the wild schemes of a heartbroken woman, but the careful, methodical planning of someone who'd learned patience from 5 years of disappointment. Patrick had taken my sister. He thought he'd taken my peace. Now I was going to take everything from him. The house felt different when we got home from the cemetery. Filled with Mia's friends and co-workers, all speaking in hushed tones and offering sympathy casseroles. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, accepting hugs and murmured condolences while my mind worked on a completely different level. Gabriel was there too, still with Daniel. The man looked exhausted, probably hadn't slept properly in weeks. I watched Patrick approach them, saw how his eyes lingered on the baby with something that looked almost possessive. When Gabriel reached tiny arms toward Patrick, I felt sick. He remembers you, Daniel said gratefully. Thank you for helping so much these past months. Patrick's smile was warm, practiced. Of course. Mia was family. Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. After everyone left, I helped clean up while Patrick put leftover food in the refrigerator. Normal domestic tasks that felt surreal after what I'd learned. When he suggested we stay the night at Mia's house instead of driving home, I agreed. Someone needed to start going through her belongings, he said. It would be easier to start tomorrow morning. I knew he had other reasons for wanting to stay. That night, I lay awake listening to Patrick's steady breathing beside me in Mia's guest room. The same room where he'd probably spent countless nights while I worked late shifts at the hospital. The same bed where my sister had made decisions that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. When morning came, Patrick left early to handle some urgent work matter. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner, then I got to work. Mia's bathroom still smelled like her lavender shampoo. Her toothbrush sat in the holder next to a smaller one that must have been Gabriel's. I carefully wrapped both in tissue paper and placed them in separate plastic bags. From her dresser, I collected strands of dark hair from her old brush. Each item went into labeled bags with dates and times written in my neat handwriting. The hardest part was getting Patrick's DNA sample. When he came home that evening, I waited until he showered. His razor sat on the bathroom counter, still damp. I wrapped it carefully in a clean towel and added it to my collection. 3 days later, I drove 2 towns over to a private lab. The technician was professional and discreet. No questions asked beyond the necessary paperwork. I paid in cash and gave a fake name. The results would be ready in a week. Playing the perfect wife became my full-time performance. I cooked Patrick's favorite meals and listened to his stories about work. When he talked about missing Mia, I held his hand and offered comfort. When he mentioned how hard it must be for Daniel to raise Gabriel alone, I suggested we should offer more help. Maybe we could babysit sometimes, I said over dinner. Give Daniel a break. Patrick's fork paused halfway to his mouth. That's thoughtful of you. But Daniel seems to have things handled. Still, Gabriel is practically family. And children need stability during times like this. Something flickered across Patrick's face. Interest. Calculation. You're right. We should definitely stay involved in his life. Every conversation felt like a chess match now. Patrick thought he was playing against a grieving woman who suspected nothing. He had no idea I was already 3 moves ahead. While waiting for the DNA results, I decided to visit Mia's lawyer. Robert Chin had handled our family's legal matters for years. I made an appointment under the pretense of settling Mia's affairs. I'm trying to organize everything for Gabriel's future, I explained, sitting across from his mahogany desk. I want to make sure I understand what my sister left behind. Robert pulled out a thick file. Mia was very thorough with her estate planning, especially after Gabriel was born. He walked me through everything. The house was paid off and would go to Gabriel when he turned 18. There was a substantial life insurance policy. But the surprise was the family trust. Your grandmother's land holdings, Robert explained. Mia inherited them when your parents died. Very valuable property now with all the development happening in that area. It's all tied up in a trust for Gabriel. My stomach dropped. How valuable? Conservative estimate? Around $2 million. Could be more in a few years. $2 million. No wonder Patrick had been so interested in helping with Gabriel. No wonder he'd whispered those words at the funeral. This wasn't just about love or betrayal. This was about money. What happens if something were to occur to Daniel? I asked carefully. Robert adjusted his glasses. Well, Daniel isn't listed as Gabriel's legal father on any documents. Mia never established paternity officially. So if something happened to him, the court would need to determine Gabriel's next legal guardian. And who would that be? Family members would have the strongest claim. You, for instance, as Gabriel's aunt. Or, he paused, checking his notes. Anyone who could prove biological relation to the child. I left Robert's office with my hands shaking. The pieces were falling into place and the picture they formed was uglier than I'd imagined. Patrick hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd calculated the whole thing. Found a way to access millions of dollars through a child he believed was his son. The DNA results arrived on a Wednesday. Patrick was upstairs giving Gabriel a bath while Daniel ran errands. I sat at Mia's kitchen table and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The scientific language was complex, but the conclusion was clear. Patrick was not Gabriel's biological father. Not even close. I read the results 3 times before the implications sank in. Patrick had been so certain. So confident in his whispered confession at the cemetery. But he was wrong. Which meant everything else might be wrong too. I thought about Daniel's devotion to Gabriel. The way he held the baby like his own flesh and blood. The grief in his eyes at the funeral. What if Daniel really was Gabriel's father? What if Mia had lied to Patrick, let him believe Gabriel was his while protecting the real father? My sister was more cunning than I'd given her credit for. I folded the DNA results carefully and tucked them into my purse. Upstairs, I could hear Patrick's voice as he read Gabriel a bedtime story. The same gentle tone he'd used with me during our years of trying to conceive. The same voice that had whispered poison at my sister's grave. When Patrick came downstairs, I was washing dishes at the sink. He's finally asleep, Patrick said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. Daniel should be back soon. I leaned against him, playing my part. He's lucky to have you helping so much. Gabriel needs stability. Male figures in his life. Patrick's voice carried that possessive tone again. I've been thinking we should petition for partial custody. Help Daniel with the financial burden. There was. His real plan laid bare. That's very generous, I said softly. Patrick kissed my neck. I just want what's best for the boy. I smiled, still facing away so he couldn't see my expression. As now I knew the truth. Patrick wasn't Gabriel's father. His entire scheme was built on a lie. And I was the only person in the world who knew it. The question was, what was I going to do with that knowledge? For 2 weeks I carried the DNA results like a loaded weapon. Every morning when Patrick kissed me goodbye, every evening when he asked about my day, every night when he held me close in bed, I felt those papers burning in my purse. The truth was mine now, and I was going to choose exactly when and how to use it. Daniel had been coming by more often since the funeral. Sweet, grieving Daniel who had no idea he was Gabriel's real father. I watched him during those visits, studied the way his face lit up when Gabriel laughed, how naturally he soothed the toddler's tears. Love radiated from every gesture, every word. Meanwhile, Patrick continued his performance as the caring family friend. He brought expensive toys for Gabriel, talked about college funds and future planning. Each act of fake generosity made my stomach turn. Daniel seems overwhelmed, Patrick mentioned one evening as we drove home. Maybe we should offer to take Gabriel for weekends. Give him some space to grieve properly. Kept my voice level. That's thoughtful of you. The boy needs stability. Structure. Patrick's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I've been thinking about what Mia would have wanted. What Mia would have wanted. The irony was breathtaking. That night I made my decision. I was going to tell Daniel the truth, but I needed to be careful. This wasn't just about revealing Patrick's lies anymore. This was about giving a father his son back. I called Daniel the next morning while Patrick was at work. My hands shook as I dialed his number. Daniel, it's Casey. Could we meet for coffee? There's something important I need to discuss with you. He sounded surprised but agreed. We met at a small cafe 2 towns over, far from anyone who might recognize us. Daniel looked tired, older than his 35 years. Grief had carved new lines around his eyes. Is everything okay? He asked, settling into the booth across from me. I pulled the DNA results from my purse and placed them on the table between us. I need to show you something. But first, I need you to tell me about your relationship with Mia. Daniel's face went red. We weren't. She was sick and I was just helping. Daniel. I reached across and touched his hand. I'm not judging you. I need to know the truth. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I loved her. I know that sounds terrible, with her being married to someone else's memory and sick and everything, but I couldn't help it. She was so brave, so strong even while she was dying. Tears started flowing down his cheeks. We were together for about 6 months before Gabriel was born. Then she got scared, said it was too complicated, that people would think she was just using me for help with the baby. My heart ached for him. Did she ever tell you who Gabriel's father was? She said it was someone from before, someone who couldn't be in the picture. I never pushed for details because it seemed to upset her. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. But I loved Gabriel from the moment I met him. It didn't matter to me who his biological father was. I pushed the DNA results toward him. It should matter to you now. Daniel's hands trembled as he read the report. I watched his face change as the words sank in. Confusion, then hope, then pure joy mixed with heartbreak. He's mine. Daniel whispered. He's yours. Daniel broke down then, sobbing right there in the coffee shop. Other customers stared, but I didn't care. I was watching a man discover he had a son, and it was beautiful and devastating at the same time. Why didn't she tell me? He asked when he could speak again. I thought about my sister, dying and scared and carrying so many secrets. Maybe she was protecting you. Or maybe she was protecting Gabriel. I don't know, Daniel. But what matters now is that you know. We talked for 2 more hours. I told him about Patrick's confession at the funeral, about the inheritance, about everything I'd discovered. Daniel listened with growing anger and disbelief. So he was planning to use Gabriel to access Mia's estate? That's exactly what he was planning. Daniel's jaw tightened. What do we do now? I'd been thinking about that question for days. Gabriel's 2nd birthday is next month. I think it's time everyone knew the truth. Planning Gabriel's birthday party became my new obsession. I spent hours creating the guest list, making sure every important person in our lives would be there. Patrick's business partners, our neighbors, family friends, even Pastor Williams, who had officiated Mia's funeral. Patrick was thrilled that I was taking charge of the celebration. You're amazing, Casey. Mia would be so proud of how you're stepping up for Gabriel. Every compliment felt like acid in my veins. I ordered custom invitations with Gabriel's baby photo on the front. Inside I wrote, "Join us as Gabriel turns 2. A celebration of truth, family, and new beginnings." Patrick never asked to see the final wording. The decorations were simple but elegant. Blue and white balloons, a train-themed cake, toys scattered around Mia's living room. Daniel helped with the setup, his hands shaking with nervous energy. Are you sure about this? He asked as we hung streamers. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The guests started arriving at 2 o'clock. Gabriel was in his best outfit, a little blue suit that made him look impossibly grown up. He ran around the room, accepting hugs and presents with toddler enthusiasm. Patrick worked the room like a politician, accepting congratulations on his devotion to Gabriel and Daniel. I heard him tell Mrs. Henderson from next door how important it was to provide male guidance for the boy. Children need father figures, he said, bouncing Gabriel on his knee. Especially boys. The cake cutting was scheduled for 3:30. At 3:25 I stood up and called for everyone's attention. Before we celebrate Gabriel's special day, I have something to share with all of you. I smiled at the room full of expectant faces. It's about family and truth and making sure Gabriel grows up knowing exactly who he belongs to. I walked to a table near the kitchen and picked up a stack of white envelopes I'd prepared that morning. Each one was labeled with a guest's name in my careful handwriting. I've put together some information that I think you'll all find very interesting, I said, beginning to distribute the envelopes. Please open them now. The room fell silent as people tore open their envelopes. Inside each one was a copy of the DNA test results, along with printed screenshots of text messages I'd found on Patrick's phone, photos of him visiting Mia during her illness, and a detailed timeline of his lies. I watched the faces change as people read. Confusion turned to shock, turned to disgust. Whispers started, then grew louder. Patrick's face went white as snow. Casey, what is this? I walked over to where Daniel stood holding Gabriel, both of them looking uncertain about what was happening. This, I said, taking Gabriel's small hand in mine, is the truth. Patrick, you told me at my sister's grave that she gave you a son. You were wrong. I turned to face the room full of stunned guests. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Gabriel's real father. Daniel Morrison. The man who loved my sister, who held her hand through chemotherapy, who has been raising his son without even knowing Gabriel was his. The silence was deafening. Then Gabriel, oblivious to the adult drama swirling around him, reached up and patted Daniel's face with his tiny palm. Did I? He said clearly. And Daniel, tears streaming down his face, kissed his son's forehead and whispered, Yes, buddy. I'm your dada. The room exploded after Gabriel called Daniel, dada. Voices rose in anger and confusion. Mrs. Henderson clutched her pearls and stared at Patrick like he'd grown horns. Pastor Williams looked between the DNA results and Patrick with undisguised disgust. But Patrick went on the attack. This is insane, he shouted, waving the papers in the air. Casey's lost her mind with grief. These documents are fake. Daniel probably paid someone to forge them. Several guests backed away from him, but Patrick wasn't finished. He pointed an accusing finger at Daniel, who was still holding Gabriel protectively. You think I don't see what's happening here? You want Gabriel's inheritance for yourself. So you seduce my grieving wife into believing these lies. Daniel's face flushed red. Patrick, stop. You're scaring Gabriel. I'm scaring him? You're the one trying to steal a child from his family. I watched Patrick unravel with fascination. This was the real man behind the mask. Entitled, vicious, willing to destroy anyone who threatened his plans. The room full of witnesses was seeing him for what he truly was. Enough, I said quietly, but somehow my voice cut through the chaos. Everyone please. Gabriel doesn't need to see this. Daniel immediately moved toward the door with Gabriel, several guests following them outside. The remaining people stared at Patrick and me like we were actors in some twisted play. Patrick, I said, my voice steady as stone. We need to talk. Privately. After the last guest left, the house felt hollow. Patrick paced the living room like a caged animal while I cleaned up birthday decorations with methodical calm. How could you do this to me? He demanded. Humiliate me in front of everyone? Make me look like some kind of monster. I folded a tablecloth with careful precision. I didn't make you anything, Patrick. I just showed people who you really are. Those tests are fake. They have to be. Call the lab yourself. Ask for verification. I met his eyes steadily. But we both know what they'll tell you. Patrick's face crumpled then, the fight going out of him. He sank onto the couch and put his head in his hands. I thought he was mine, he whispered. All this time I thought. You thought you'd hit the jackpot, I said. A secret son and a $2 million inheritance. Must have felt like winning the lottery. He looked up sharply. It wasn't about money. Wasn't it? I sat across from him, studying his face. When did you first learn about the family trust, Patrick? Before or after you started sleeping with my sister? The question hung in the air between us. Patrick's silence was answer enough. I loved her, he finally said. I really did love Mia. Maybe you did. But you loved what she could give you more. Over the following weeks, Patrick tried to salvage his reputation. He called mutual friends, explaining his side of the story. He hired a lawyer to challenge the DNA results. He even attempted to file for visitation rights, claiming he'd formed a parental bond with Gabriel during Mia's illness. But the damage was done. Word spread quickly through our small community. Patrick's construction business started losing clients. The bank called about our mortgage payments. Friends stopped returning his calls. Meanwhile, I was busy with my own projects. I'd been thinking about Alan Morrison for months. Not Daniel, his last name was just coincidence, but Alan Morrison, Patrick's former business partner. 3 years ago, Patrick had convinced Alan to invest in a hotel renovation project. When the deal went south, Patrick had protected his own interests while Alan lost his life savings. Alan was working construction now, barely making ends meet. His wife had left him, taking their daughter. He'd lost his house, his dignity, everything. And he blamed Patrick for all of it. I found Alan at a job site on the other side of town. He was installing drywall, his hands rough and scarred from manual labor. When I introduced myself as Patrick's wife, his face hardened. "What do you want?" he asked, not stopping his work. "I want to help you get back what Patrick stole from you." That got his attention. Alan set down his tools and looked at me properly for the first time. "Patrick didn't steal anything. He just made sure he got paid while I got nothing. I know about the resort deal, Alan. I know how he altered the contracts after you'd already signed. I know about the offshore account he used to hide profits." Alan's eyes widened. "How do you know about that?" "Because I've been married to him for 7 years. I know all his tricks." We talked for 2 hours in that half-finished building. Alan told me everything. How Patrick had manipulated the partnership agreement, how he'd used insider information to secure the best properties for himself, how he'd systematically destroyed Alan's reputation in the industry. "I tried to expose him," Alan said bitterly. "But Patrick's lawyers were better than mine. Better funded, anyway. What if I told you I had evidence? Documents that could prove fraud?" Alan laughed harshly. "You'd do that to your own husband?" "My husband confessed to having an affair with my dying sister. My husband tried to steal a child's inheritance. My husband is not the man I married." I met Alan's eyes steadily. "He destroyed your life. He destroyed mine. Maybe it's time we return the favor." The plan we crafted was elegant in its simplicity. Alan still had emails from the hotel deal, correspondence that showed Patrick's deceptive practices. I provided bank records I'd copied from Patrick's files, documents that revealed the hidden payments and altered contracts. But we needed something more recent, something that would connect Patrick's past fraud to current criminal activity. That's when I remembered Mia's bank account. During her illness, I'd helped Mia manage her finances. She'd given me power of attorney when the treatments made her too sick to handle paperwork. I knew Patrick had convinced her to let him help with some transactions. At the time, I thought he was being supportive. Now I realized he'd been skimming money from her medical expense account. Small amounts, spread over months, probably hoping no one would notice after she died. But I'd kept detailed records. I had copies of every bank statement, every transaction. Alan and I spent weeks building our case. We created a timeline that showed Patrick's pattern of financial manipulation spanning 3 years. We gathered witness statements from other business partners he'd cheated. We even found evidence that he'd been inflating insurance claims on his construction projects. When we felt ready, Alan contacted a detective he knew from his old neighborhood. Detective Rodriguez was familiar with financial fraud cases and eager to investigate someone with Patrick's reputation. The timing had to be perfect. I wanted Patrick to feel secure, confident that the birthday party disaster was behind him. So I played the role of reconciling wife. I cooked his favorite meals, listened to his complaints about unfair treatment, even suggested we take a weekend trip to work on our marriage. Patrick was pathetically grateful for what he thought was forgiveness. He booked us a cabin in the mountains for our wedding anniversary weekend. The same date we'd gotten married 7 years ago, full of hope and love and dreams that now seemed like they belonged to different people. I packed carefully for the trip. Lingerie to maintain the illusion. My laptop to finalize the evidence package. And a bottle of champagne to celebrate when it was all over. "This is exactly what we need," Patrick said as we drove toward the mountains. "Time away from all the drama, just the two of us." "Just the two of us," I agreed, watching the familiar landscape blur past the car window. He had no idea that while he was looking forward to our romantic weekend, Detective Rodriguez was preparing search warrants. By the time we returned home on Sunday, Patrick's carefully constructed world would be nothing but rubble. The cabin was beautiful, exactly the kind of place we would have loved during our early marriage. Patrick opened the champagne and made a toast to new beginnings. We clinked glasses and I smiled like a woman in love. To us, he said. To getting exactly what we deserve, I replied. He thought I was talking about happiness. I was talking about justice. The champagne turned bitter in my mouth as I watched Patrick sleep that Sunday morning. Our anniversary weekend had been perfect from his perspective. Romantic dinners, long walks, intimate conversations about rebuilding our marriage. He'd even talked about trying for children again, now that the Gabriel situation was resolved. I checked my phone while he dozed. 3 missed calls from Detective Rodriguez. It was happening. We should head back early, I said, gently shaking Patrick awake. I have a headache and I'd rather recover at home. He was disappointed but understanding. Always so considerate when he thought he was winning. The drive home felt longer than usual. Patrick hummed along to the radio, his hand resting on my thigh. He talked about plans for renovating our kitchen, maybe taking a real vacation this summer. His mood was lighter than I'd seen it in months. We pulled into our driveway at 2:30 in the afternoon. There were 3 police cars waiting. Patrick's humming stopped abruptly. What the hell? Detective Rodriguez approached as we got out of the car. He was a compact man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Behind him stood 2 uniformed officers and a woman I didn't recognize. Patrick Morrison? I'm Detective Rodriguez. We have a warrant for your arrest. The color drained from Patrick's face. For what? This is insane. Casey, tell them this is a mistake. But I was already walking toward the house, leaving him standing in the driveway as the detective read him his rights. Fraud. Embezzlement. Wire fraud. Money laundering. The charges seemed to go on forever. Casey. Patrick's voice cracked as they put handcuffs on him. Casey, call my lawyer. This is all a misunderstanding. I turned at the front door and looked back at him one last time. I'll call someone, I said quietly. I called Alan Morrison instead. The house felt different after Patrick was gone. Quieter but not in a peaceful way. More like the silence after a storm, when you're assessing the damage and wondering what comes next. The media attention started immediately. By Monday morning, reporters were camped outside our house. Patrick's construction company made the local news, then the regional papers, then somehow went viral on social media. Local businessman arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The story had everything: betrayal, stolen money, a secret affair with his wife's dying sister. I unplugged the landline and stopped checking social media. The neighbors stared when I went to get my mail. Former friends crossed the street to avoid awkward conversations. I became the wife of the con man, the woman who'd either been incredibly naive or secretly complicit. Most people assumed I was a victim. They were half right. Patrick's lawyer called Tuesday afternoon. A slick man named Harrison who spoke in careful legal phrases and seemed more concerned about his fee than his client's innocence. Mrs. Morrison, your husband's accounts have been frozen pending investigation. I'm afraid that includes joint accounts and assets held in both your names. I understand. He's asked me to request that you post bail. The amount is substantial, but if you could mortgage the house. No. Harrison paused. I'm sorry. I said no. Patrick can find another way to make bail. Mrs. Morrison, I think you should know that the prosecution has substantial evidence. Financial records, email correspondence, witness testimony. This isn't going away. Good, I said and hung up. Patrick tried calling from jail that evening. I let it go to voicemail. Then I deleted the message without listening to it. I spent the next few weeks methodically erasing Patrick from our shared life. I changed the locks first, then opened new bank accounts in my name only. I called his employer and his business partners, playing the role of the shocked wife discovering her husband's crimes. I had no idea, I told anyone who would listen. I trusted him completely. I feel so betrayed. It wasn't entirely a lie. The house began to feel like mine again. I moved Patrick's clothes to the garage, then donated them to charity. I repainted the bedroom walls from the beige he'd preferred to a soft lavender that reminded me of Mia's old room. I bought new sheets, new curtains, new everything. Gabriel's pictures still hung in the hallway. Daniel had been bringing him by occasionally, Tentative visits where we'd sit in the living room and I'd read stories or help with puzzles. Gabriel was thriving with Daniel, growing more confident and talkative every week. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked one afternoon as Gabriel napped on my couch. "This can't be easy for you." I looked at the sleeping toddler, his dark hair falling across his forehead just like Mia's used to. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Daniel didn't understand, but he didn't push. He was dealing with his own adjustment, suddenly becoming a single father to a child he'd only recently learned was his. But he was good at it. Natal. Gabriel adored him. Patrick's trial was set for 6 months away. His lawyer kept calling, wanting me to testify as a character witness. I told him I wouldn't be available. Instead, I focused on building something new. I enrolled in grief counseling, not for Patrick's loss but for Mia's. For the sister I'd loved and lost, for the marriage I'd believed in, for the naive woman I'd been before I learned what betrayal really meant. "Tell me about your anger," Dr. Martinez asked during one session. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, and realized it was true. I was furious for a while. But anger is exhausting. It burns through you and leaves nothing behind. What replaced it? I thought about that for a long moment. Purpose, I think. Clarity. The house where Mia had died became my refuge. I moved there permanently after the divorce papers were filed. Patrick could have our old house when he got out of prison, if he could still afford it after paying legal fees and restitution. Mia's house held better memories anyway. I set up an art studio in her old sewing room, started painting again for the first time in years. I planted a garden in the backyard where Gabriel could play when he visited. I turned Mia's bedroom into a guest room for Daniel and Gabriel when they stayed overnight. The reporters eventually moved on to newer scandals. The neighbors stopped staring. Life found a new rhythm, quieter but more honest than before. Patrick wrote letters from jail. Long, rambling things full of apologies and explanations and pleas for forgiveness. I read the first few, then started throwing them away unopened. What was the point? Nothing he could say would change what he'd done or undo the hurt he'd caused. The last letter I opened was different. Shorter. Just one line. "Why did you destroy me?" I sat with that question for hours, holding the paper in my hands. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with all the other things I was done with. Old wedding photos, love letters from our early years, the positive pregnancy test I'd saved from the one time we'd gotten our hopes up. I didn't destroy Patrick. Patrick destroyed himself. I just stopped protecting him from the consequences. Spring came early that year. I planted flowers in Mia's old garden boxes, choosing varieties that would bloom in succession from March through October. When Gabriel visited, he helped me water them with a tiny plastic watering can Daniel had bought him. "Flowers are pretty," Gabriel said one afternoon, his vocabulary expanding daily. "Yes, they are," I agreed, watching him carefully sprinkle water on the marigold seedlings. "And they grow back every year even after winter kills them." Gabriel nodded solemnly, as if this was the most important information he'd ever received. Then he ran off to chase a butterfly, leaving me alone with the garden and the gentle afternoon sun. Not all things buried stay dead, I thought. Some rise stronger. The butterfly Gabriel had been chasing landed on one of the marigold buds, its orange and black wings fluttering gently in the afternoon breeze. I watched it for a moment, thinking about transformations and second chances, before Gabriel's laughter drew my attention back to the present. "Aunt Casey, look." He pointed at a ladybug crawling across his tiny palm. "It's red." "It's beautiful," I said, kneeling beside him. At 3 years old now, Gabriel was becoming more like Mia every day, curious about everything, gentle with living creatures, quick to find wonder in small moments. Daniel appeared around the corner of the house, carrying grocery bags. "Sorry I took so long. The store was packed." He paused, watching Gabriel show me his ladybug. "He's been talking about the garden all week." "Has he?" I helped Gabriel carefully place the ladybug on a leaf. "Well, the flowers need a good gardener." These visits had become routine over the past year. Daniel would bring Gabriel every few weeks, and they'd stay for dinner or sometimes the whole weekend. It wasn't about replacing what we'd lost. Nothing could do that. It was about building something new from the pieces that remained. Patrick's trial had ended 4 months ago. Guilty on all counts. 7 years in federal prison plus restitution to his victims. The judge had been particularly harsh about his exploitation of Mia's illness, calling it unconscionable manipulation of a vulnerable woman. I hadn't attended the sentencing. I'd been here instead teaching Gabriel how to plant sunflower seeds. The seasons changed and so did I. I started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown, helping other women navigate the legal system when their partners betrayed them. Many of their stories echoed mine: financial manipulation, emotional abuse, the slow erosion of trust that happens so gradually you don't notice until it's too late. "How did you know?" asked Sarah, a young mother whose husband had been stealing from their joint accounts. "How did you figure out what he was really doing?" I handed her a tissue and considered the question. I stopped making excuses for him. I stopped assuming his explanations were true just because I wanted them to be. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I feel so stupid. All the signs were there." "You're not stupid. You're human. We want to believe the people we love are telling us the truth." These conversations became a form of healing I hadn't expected. Each woman I helped felt like a small victory against the Patrick Morrisons of the world. Each person who learned to trust their instincts again felt like justice growing in soil that had once been poisoned. Gabriel started preschool that fall. Daniel was nervous about leaving him, but Gabriel thrived. His teacher said he was particularly good at helping other children when they were sad or scared. "He has an unusual amount of empathy for someone his age," Ms. Rodriguez told Daniel during parent conferences. "It's like he understands that people can be hurting even when they don't show it." Daniel shared this with me over dinner one evening and I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Gabriel would never remember Mia, but somehow he carried pieces of her kindness with him. "Do you think he'll want to know about her someday?" Daniel asked. "About what really happened?" I set down my fork and considered the question. "I think he'll want to know that his mother loved him enough to protect him, and that she made sure he ended up with the right father." The anniversary of Mia's death approached quietly. I'd been dreading it for weeks, unsure how to mark the day or what it should mean now that so much had changed. Then Gabriel solved the problem for me. "Can we visit Mama Mia?" he asked one afternoon, using the name he'd coined for my sister based on the stories we told him. "I want to show her my new drawing." Daniel looked at me questioningly. We'd never taken Gabriel to the cemetery before, unsure if he was old enough to understand. "What did you draw?" I asked Gabriel. He ran to get his artwork from the kitchen table, a colorful picture of 3 stick figures standing in front of a house. "That's me and Daddy and you," he explained, pointing to each figure. "And this is our house where we have dinner and plant flowers." The innocence of it broke my heart and mended it at the same time. In Gabriel's world, the 3 of us were simply family. No complicated history, no betrayal or loss, just the people who loved him and took care of him. "I think Mama Mia would love to see your drawing," I said. We went the next morning, a crisp October day with leaves crunching under our feet. Gabriel held both our hands as we walked through the cemetery, chattering about the different flowers and asking why some graves had angels while others had crosses. When we reached Mia's headstone, Gabriel became quiet. The marble was weathered now, softened by a year of seasons. Someone, probably our mother's sister who lived across the state, had left fresh flowers the week before. "Is she really under there?" Gabriel asked, his voice very small. "Her body is," Daniel said gently. "But the part of her that loved you, that's still here with us." Gabriel nodded solemnly and placed his drawing against the headstone, weighing it down with a small rock he'd collected on the walkover. Then he sat cross-legged in the grass and began talking to the stone as if Mia could hear him. "Hi, Mama Mia. I drew you a picture. Aunt Casey taught me how to make the sun yellow instead of orange. And Daddy says I'm getting really good at tying my shoes." I felt tears coming and didn't try to stop them. This was what Mia had wanted. Gabriel surrounded by love, protected from the ugliness that had shaped his earliest months. She'd made her choices, kept her secrets, and somehow orchestrated a future where her son would be safe and cherished. After a while, Gabriel stood up and walked over to me. "Aunt Casey, are you sad?" "A little," I admitted. "But not the bad kind of sad. The kind of sad that comes with loving someone very much." He considered this with the seriousness of a child trying to understand complex emotions. Then he hugged my legs tightly. "It's okay to be sad sometimes," he said, apparently quoting something Daniel had taught him. "Daddy says feelings are like weather, they change." We stayed a few more minutes, then walked back to the car. Gabriel fell asleep in his car seat on the drive home, still clutching a leaf he'd picked up near Mia's grave. That evening, after Daniel and Gabriel had gone home, I sat in my studio and started a new painting. Not of Mia this time, but of the garden we'd built together. The one where Gabriel played and learned and grew into the remarkable little person he was becoming. The painting took weeks to finish. Layer by layer, I built up colors that captured not just the visual beauty of the space, but the emotional weight of it. The hope and healing that had grown there. The way love could take root even in soil that had been tainted by betrayal. When it was done, I hung it in the living room where Gabriel could see it during his visits. He studied it seriously, pointing out details I'd included. The butterfly he'd chased, the ladybug that had crawled across his palm, the sunflowers that now stood taller than he was. "It looks like home," he said simply. And it was. Not the home I'd planned when I married Patrick, not the life I'd imagined when Mia was still alive and healthy. But home nonetheless, built from truth instead of lies, rooted in love instead of manipulation. People sometimes asked if I regretted exposing Patrick. If I thought I should have handled things differently, been more forgiving, found a way to work through our problems. The answer was always the same. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. Some lies are too destructive to overlook. Gabriel was living proof of that truth. In a world where Patrick had succeeded, Gabriel would have grown up believing lies about his father, his inheritance, his very identity. Instead, he was growing up surrounded by people who chose honesty even when it was painful. That seemed like justice to me. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind that grows slowly year by year, in the hearts of people who refuse to let betrayal have the final word. My name is Casey Walsh. I'm not a victim or a hero, just a woman who learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in someone else's lies. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. If this story of calculated justice had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Casey handed out those white envelopes at Gabriel's birthday party, revealing the truth to everyone. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.